October 26, 1998, Brasilia. The Itamaraty Palace brings together several of the most important representatives of South America. And although a climate of diplomatic formality reigns, a barely contained emotion flies over the place. Everything that is wanted under the sky has its time. After decades of wanting to win wars, today we are winning peace together, are the words of Jamil Maodo, Ecuadorian president, which received widespread applause. The bordering and socio-economic integration agreement signed together with his Peruvian counterpart, Alberto Fujimori, tried to put an end to more than 100 years of armed confrontations. The last of them is still an open wound that this day will try to heal. But how did the events of the last war between South American states unfold? Join us in this new episode of Military History to relive one of the saddest pages in the history of the continent, the Cenepa War. Are you ready? Then prepare to travel back in time. In 1941, a war broke out that meant a before and after in the relationship between Peru and Ecuador. The consequences were a series of territorial claims by Ecuador around sovereign access to the Amazon basin. Almost 7 months later, and thanks to a protocol signed by Rio de Janeiro, the boundary points were fixed, and apparently the conflict was reaching its end. Unfortunately, this harmony did not last long. In 1947, in the midst of the delimitation negotiations, it was noticed that the protocol did not contemplate the Cenepa River, which would be presented by Ecuador as a true watershed. Therefore, the efforts were rendered ineffective. Towards 1991, with high levels of tension between the two nations, the foreign ministers signed a gentleman's agreement that established a security area in the non-demarcated sector, which respected the conditions of the Rio de Janeiro Protocol. However, towards the end of 1994, the movement of troops from both sides towards the conflict zone anticipated the worst. January 9th and 11th, 1995 were the prelude to war. In the Cenepa area, the first confrontations between border patrols began. Diplomacy had failed, leading to an undeclared war. But how were both nations prepared to face this? Because the Peruvian army, for much of the 1980s, fought an exhausting conflict against the Shining Path, its military resources had been organized to confront a subversive organization. And while experience in actual combat was an advantage, the truth is that the war against its northern neighbor faced Peru with a different picture. In addition, the country was experiencing an economic crisis that particularly affected its Air Force, which had very few operational aircraft, only 3 Mirage 2000Ps, 7 Su-22s, 4 Canberra bombers, 8 AT-37Bs, and 5 Mi-25 helicopters. The situation with the air defense system was not much better. Less than 45% of its 20 radar stations were operational. On the opposite side, Ecuador had formed special forces over the course of 10 years, such as the Irias, a commando group made up exclusively of natives of the Amazon region, whose knowledge and ability to survive in that environment was ideal. Also, by 1995, the Ecuadorian Air Force was one of the best equipped in the region. It was served by 12 Mirage F-1JA, 10 Kefir C-2, 10 Jaguars Mk-1, and 10 A-37B. The conflict began on January 26, 1995, when the Ecuadorian Sapphire Combat Team attacked a Peruvian patrol at the North Base. Both countries ordered the general deployment of their troops on the borderline and the Pacific coast. Around 140,000 men were mobilized throughout the war. But what was the objective of the Ecuadorian forces? To carry out an attrition war. To achieve this, Lieutenant Colonel Luis Hernandez of the General Miguel Iturralde Tactical Group had permission to use clandestine bases. The most important operations were carried out in Cueva de los Tallos, South Base, Coangos, and mostly Tuinza, a target that would become a priority for both forces. So, what was the response of the Peruvian army? They deployed units specialized in combat operations in the jungle, which is why Colonel Roberto Chiabra, chief of the Operations Command, mobilized with the counter-subversive infantry battalions brought from the Alto Huallaga military front. The main difficulty was access, so the Peruvian ground troops had to arrive in Mi-25 helicopters. The anti-personnel mines, dumped in thick vegetation which made their detection very difficult, were a nightmare to these soldiers. In addition, this tactic cost the Peruvian army the downing of 2 helicopters, in the hands of the Ecuadorian manpads. During the first days of February, the bombings began to gain relevance for both sides. Ecuador with its Strike Masters Mk-89, Peru with their Tucano EMB-312. Both resorted to their Cessna Dragonfly 837B planes. By February 9th, the air war intensified. Peru unleashed its Cambras in a night operation and carried out 16 missions with its Sukhoi Su-22s. February 10th became a historic date for the Ecuadorian Air Force. The squad of Mirage F-1 and Kefir planes, commanded by Major Raul Banderas, shot down 2 Sukhoi Su-22 planes and 1 A337 of the Peruvian Air Force, which from that moment on did not continue with its bombardments. Towards the middle of February, the conflict gained greater media relevance. On the 13th, Alberto Fujimori appeared for the first time on CNN and TV Peru, announcing the taking of Tuinza. 2 days later, the Ecuadorian military with GPS positioners presented alleged exact coordinates of the base, which were still in Ecuadorian hands. However, accredited reporters from media such as TVE, the BBC, and The Guardian questioned, using their own GPS, the veracity of these coordinates. On February 17th, in the presence of the representatives of the United States, Brazil, Chile, and Argentina, guarantors of the Rio de Janeiro Protocol, Ecuador and Peru signed the Itamaraty Declaration of Peace, confirming an immediate ceasefire and the establishment of a peace group. However, 5 days later, the most tragic event of the conflict occurred: Black Wednesday. That February 22nd, a surprise attack on several Ecuadorian bases, with the ceasefire already in force, produced a number of casualties greater than the total accumulated since the beginning of the confrontations. On Saturday, February 25th, the United States asked the parties to avoid any initiative that could be interpreted as a threat or provocation. Thus, the conflict zone was demilitarized. 3 years and 8 months later, through the act signed on that emotional day in October 1998, the borders were finally agreed based on the protocol signed in 1942. Ecuador obtained the perpetual right of free navigation on the Amazon River and its northern affluents, and a 50-year permit to establish 2 commercial piers. Tuinza was recognized as a sovereign Peruvian territory, but a small property of 1 square kilometer was yielded to Ecuador. Today, this area remains as a place of prayer, where 14 Ecuadorian soldiers rest, heroes of a war that claimed the lives of 117 South Americans. If you like the story of the Cenepa War, we invite you to share your opinion. Do you think that the wound caused by the war is already closed? Or is there still the possibility of a new confrontation? Leave us your comment below, and don't forget to subscribe and activate notifications to learn about many more military events that left their mark on history. Thank you very much for joining us, and until the next video.